Uh, I don't have an intro.
Um, we can just start like this.
Okay, so there I was.
Um,
Maybe this should be our intro.
Hello everybody. Welcome back to the podcast that still doesn't have a name at the time of recording it. Do you think we'll have a name?
No, it does have a name.
Oh wait, what do we name it?
It has a name.
Wait, what's the name?
Yeah, we're calling it Pokemon Perspectives. What does it mean for a Pokemon team to be good? And how do the best Pokemon players put them together on their quests to become world champion? I'm Traylor, and alongside Wolfe Glick, we're going to interview the world's best competitive Pokemon players in order to find out their perspectives on the complex game of VGC, Video Game Championships, the official Pokemon battling format. Today, we're going to be interviewing David Kotesh from the Czech Republic. He just got top 16 at the 2022 Pokemon World Championships, and for a very long time, he's been known as a creator of inventive teams and a strong battler. So welcome to Pokemon Perspectives.
Welcome back to Pokemon Perspectives, everybody. I'm Wolfe Glick. I am one of the hosts. I am joined by my co-host Traylor. Aaron, how's it going?
It's going great, Wolf. I'm fired up.
We are fired up.
Fired up.
Both of us are fired up. That's not mutually exclusive to Aaron. Today, we're going to be talking to David Kotesh, a player from the Czech Republic who has a really, really interesting perspective on team building and is one of the most creative players, I would say, in the game. And recently had a very strong finishing, I believe, top 16, if I'm not much mistaken, at the 2022 Pokemon World Championships with, as you might expect, a very unusual team.
Yeah, just to rattle off the Pokemon on his team from the 2022 World Championships, he's got Dialga, Yveltal, Gyarados, Thundurus, Ferrothorn, and Landorus Therian. Listeners familiar with VGC 2022 will have seen most of these Pokemon around except for Gyarados.
And I would say Ferrothorn too, honestly. Ferrothorn was not super common this year.
That's fair, but Gyarados had like a 0.01% usage rate, and I bet most of that was David.
Yeah, I would agree.
Putting money on weird Pokemon to top cut the World Championships, never in a million years would Gyarados be my first choice. And I think that's really cool. And then Dialga and Yveltal is a really interesting archetype. Just compared to the Zacians and the Kyogres and the Groudons running around, it's like, what are these two Pokemon doing together? And he piloted it super well and reached the top cut.
And was he day one? Can you remind me?
Yeah, actually, he made it through day one and went 6-1. And that's pretty amazing to go all the way to top cut from day one with such a crazy team.
Yeah. It requires a really high level of consistency because there's always some variance in Pokemon. Maybe you just had good matchups, maybe you just had a good day, but to do it 2 days in a row to make it through day one and then make it to top cut is very, very impressive. So especially it's impressive on its own, and to do it with like a Pokemon that nobody else at the World Championships brought, being Gyarados, is even more impressive. And it was on an archetype that was not considered especially strong. I think he might have been the only Dialga in top cut, and he was, I think, also the only Yveltal in top cut as well. Or maybe that's not, yeah, there was probably one other Yveltal, maybe two, but his team was very unusual across the board. So to finish so strongly with Pokemon that most of the field didn't consider, I think is pretty incredible.
And we haven't even talked about one of the coolest parts technically of this team, which is the serious nature on his Assault Vest Yveltal. So a neutral nature boosting none of your stats is in most cases, and when I say most, I mean 99.99999. Like, of all the Pokemon out there, in everyone's team builder, it's a very bad idea because you're wasting points. And somebody actually brought serious nature Groudon. This is the only other time in VGC history, or I guess VGC World's history, that I think a serious nature has mattered.
But I think so. Yeah. So that is 2016, and I think that it actually
ended up mattering.
Yes,
it ended up being suboptimal.
It was. Yes,
I believe it was Edward Chung is his name.
Harbinger Aegis.
Yes. He brought a Serious Nature Groudon, and then after the tournament, he posted about it, and people were like, here's an EV spread that does the same things, and also...
But gives you more points.
Gives you 4 more points. But then, for David's Yveltal, he wanted to boost his speed with max airstream, so he didn't want to drop speed. He wanted to boost his special defense because he had an assault vest, so he didn't want to drop that. He wanted a lot of special attack because of Oblivion Wing and Snarl. He wanted attack for a specific Calyrex Shadow Rider Sucker Punch calc. And then, of course, you need all the defense you can get. So, Serious Nature, to meet all of those requirements, ended up being optimal, which is so cool.
And by the way, my little fun fact about the Serious Groudon player, which was not even optimal, is that was my one loss at the 2016 World Championships. That was the only player I lost to, was Serious Groudon.
Yes. Yeah, that was my win in it. Yeah,
so, but normally, basically in almost all cases, like, even if you care about a stat, you'd be better off raising your highest stat and lowering your lowest one with your nature, and then making up the difference with your EVs. But because of how David specifically trained his Yveltal, where he was putting a little bit of like between 40 and 80 EVs in like every stat, it ended up being that their differential wasn't enough that he could make it up with EVs. So it's the only time in my over a decade playing Pokemon that a Serious Nature has actually been optimal. And even when I heard about it, I was like, there's no way. And I had to double check for myself, and I was like, okay, for what he actually wants to accomplish, this is actually the right nature, which is just, I think it's something that I think not only is it almost never used, I would think that there are only a couple players in the entire world who would identify that that's the spread and the nature that Pokemon needed to do. So to even identify it and also to make a spread that made it work is very impressive and should give you an idea of the caliber of team builder we're talking about here. So
definitely.
Yeah.
And actually, Worlds in 2022 was not the only time that David succeeded on the World stage. He actually made a great run at Worlds 2018, which I'm hoping that we're going to be able to dive into as well.
Yeah, which is with another really unique team, as we've come to expect from David, featuring, among other cool Pokemon, a Mega Blaziken, which is not a very popular Pokemon. So yeah, just a really, really unique approach to the game that's seen a lot of success.
Yeah, definitely. So I think now is a great time to go get him.
Yeah.
You want to go talk to David?
Yeah, I'll just walk to the other room and go knock on his door.
David.
Be right back.
You just walk to the... All right, here we are with David Kotesh. Welcome to the podcast, David. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm going to college right now, so this kind of like explains my lack of uploading on YouTube. But I found some time, and so I just decided to just give it to you guys and answer some questions.
I feel like a little time thief. I really appreciate you making time. We know you're really busy, so thank you so much for coming on and joining us.
Yeah, we're definitely super grateful. So where exactly, some listeners might not be familiar with you as a player, so where are you located?
Where a lot of players probably don't know, because like I still hear all over the internet term Czechoslovakia. I'm currently located in Czech Republic. Czechoslovakia split in two in like 1993 into Slovakia and Czech Republic, and I'm living in the Czech Republic, more accurately in the capital city of Prague. It's a beautiful city. It doesn't have any skyscrapers like other cities I've visited, but it's just kind of like a peaceful city, you know, not trying to just be a global superpower, and I really like it.
I've been to Prague, and it's one of my all-time favorite cities. Like, it's so beautiful, and the food is amazing. At least from when I was there. So yeah, it's like one place that I definitely want to go back in the future.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we're going to get some local events. Maybe like going to get Prague Special back. We got it once, so maybe next time, you know.
I would be tempted for sure.
Oh, that would be pretty cool. A little Prague journey.
That would be great.
When did you get started playing VGC, David?
That's a long story. Basically, when I was like 10, I played a lot of Pokemon Stadium, and I really liked the kind of different rules they got in Pokemon Stadium, like Pika Cup, Petite Cup. And so I was like looking more interested in like playing different kind of these formats. So I looked it up on Wikipedia, and I kept scrolling down, and there I saw like, VGC 2012, what's that? You know? And so I just started this like long journey until I got like to Pokemon Showdown at about end of 2013 season. But I was still like kind of not doing English so well. So I thought like choice packs work like gems. So I was calling my opponent a cheater for my specs Suicune being locked in the Scald, But yeah, humble beginnings.
Oh my God.
So funny.
You ladder on Pokemon Showdown a lot, right?
Yeah, I ladder a lot since it's just kind of like whenever I'm like outside and like there's no one to talk to and there's like nothing to really do, I just kind of go into Pokemon Showdown and just do my own thing,
Yeah.
Even sometimes laddering in some other laddering formats. I like RB by OU because it's just so broken. It's funny.
Oh my gosh, my friends love that metagame. Well, because they played it when it was the metagame.
It was the only metagame.
So I guess, what was your first like tournament success? It could be in real life or a Nugget Bridge Major or an online tournament or something like that.
I think I would just say Italy Nationals 2015. It was technically like my first event, and I just went undefeated there in seniors, that is. But I went 12-0, and it was my first event, and it just like gave me like confidence to keep trying. And in pretty much every year ever since, I just like shown that I am capable of doing good results. So I just like kept trying, and here we are now. I think I'm doing pretty good now.
Yeah, that's an understatement. I think part of what's really interesting about you as a player is your teams, right? Like the teams that you use. I think a lot of players don't feel like they have the creative freedom that you clearly feel that you have. And so it's cool to see you do so well, especially with really unique team building choices.
Yeah, I just gotta keep trying. Like on ladder, I just keep trying different stuff, and if it just feels like it works, I think I just like it got like a feeling if the thing works or not, And I just like keep trying all the different stuff, and when it just feels like it works, it just works, and I just sometimes even try that thing in a tournament,
Yeah.
Good. Like I just did like a lot of weird like exam. Like I thought like I'm going to bring like weird liners to this worlds as well, but like it was already twice in 2015 and 2018. I brought like a mixed liners, and each time it was like more weird than the other.
Aaron, I have a question if it's okay.
Sorry, Wolf, that's actually not okay.
Okay, maybe next time.
Okay.
Just because we were talking about your laddering and your teams and the weird stuff used on ladder. Prior to this world, were you the guy using Rapidash, Yveltal, Azelf, Dialga? Was that you?
I was going to ask that.
Actually, it wasn't me, but I was heavily inspired by that team, I think. Like,
okay,
I just looked at this team and thought it was super silly, but I could just make it make more sense, and I did, I think. It's like, I think it was not Rapidash. I think it was Seeking, actually. Just doing Horn Drill.
Yeah, it was Seeking. Yeah.
Yeah, it was Horn Drill.
I was going to say I lost that team a couple times on the ladder, and I couldn't understand why. You know what I mean? Like, I just couldn't understand why. Like, normally I lose, I'm like, okay, that made sense. But I lost to it a couple times, and I was like, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, I don't get it. And so if it was you, I was going to ask you, like, why? But alas, go ahead, Aaron.
Oh, I was just going to say that I recently watched your video on your channel, David, about the preparation or your team report, and I saw the first draft of the team, which was like Azelf, Arcanine, Dialga, Yveltal, and I was like, oh my god. And then like at the end of the video, you had basically been like, yeah, like these are all the choices that I made for Worlds. This choice on Yveltal covers these three things, this choice on Ferrothorn covers these three things, and I'll link the video in the description because I'm sure it goes into more detail, but I just thought it was really cool to see how you took that from start to finish.
I did lose to you, by the way. That I remember the Arcanine Azelf version as well. Yeah.
I actually, so while watching that video, in Pokemon Showdown, every time you make a new team, it increments the counter by 1, and then when you start a new team, it says untitled blank, where like blank is the next number. And in that video, you showed off untitled 2,768. Do you have 3,000 teams in your Pokemon Showdown team builder?
Actually, that's not exactly correct. I have more because I test teams in different browser window or like different kind of like account in a browser. So, and I tested like majority of the teams towards tournaments there, So this is just like kind of like, I think the Untitled is mostly going off like my teams that I'm like not scared to reveal on my main account, but I have like 1,000 more minimum on the kind of like second browser window where I just have like the secret teams, and where I'm laddering on secret alt,
Ow.
So yeah, I have more.
But also you try a bunch of different stuff. When you're laddering, do you recreate your opponent's teams and then try them out for yourself?
Yes, I definitely try that out. If I'm just like seeing some powerful team, I'm just gonna say, all right, maybe this works better than my team,
Mm-hmm.
But usually I scrap these teams because, probably the biggest problem with that is I just don't know the context of each of the team's members.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can guess it, but usually I just like say, all right, I just don't want to waste time trying to figure out what each team member does, and like each set could be different, and because of that the team's efficiency and like capability to win can be like much worse than the originals. So usually I just try to stick to like a team idea I have on my mind right now. But if that team idea, for example, fails like miserably and it just starts losing to like popular teams, I can go back to like the team I saw on ladder at one point, and maybe this one will just like be more worth my time.
Cool.
I get it. It's kind of like almost like building insurance, right? Where like
yes, definitely.
Yeah, you see something interesting, you're like, this might be interesting. I currently like what I have better, but in case things kind of go off the rails, then maybe I'll try out this team in the future. So you just have saved it. So that makes sense to me if I'm understanding correctly.
Yes, that is correct.
Cool. So on your channel, you do this series called Metagame Mondays, which in all honesty is one of my favorite pieces of VGC video content out there. Does your ladder experience with that insurance sort of affect, like, if you saw a new archetype and you copied some teams from that, do you then, after a certain point, go explore that in one of your videos?
For example, the Cataract Shadow Rider and Zacian that just got super popular before Worlds, I would have probably made a Metagame Monday video about that. I'm not sure if I actually did, but that thing got like super popular, and I would be like, all right, there's a lot of this thing is popping out. Maybe I should not only I myself understand it, but maybe I can just share it with the rest of the world,
Yeah, definitely. Cool. That's a neat point of view. Just because we're on the topic of your 2022 Worlds team, I don't think I or really anyone expected Gyarados to top cut Worlds in VGC 2022. So how do unique Pokemon play into your philosophy? Or, like, what I'm trying to figure out is, do those choices naturally arise as a part of your team building process? Or is it like, I want to try this cool Pokemon because I think it has a really cool niche?
So, well, it's like usually I just want to fill in some like important gap in my team. And usually popular Pokemon don't really feel like a lot of like, all right. So if, for example, I have like multiple gaps on my team, usually looking at the popular Pokemon that are like really good right now, usually doesn't fill all of these gaps. They're like excelling at like one of these things. But usually whenever I look into like more niche Pokemon, they have the potential like fill in like more of the gaps because like they got like unique tools no other Pokemon has. So for example, Gyarados could like Intimidate, that's just like fills in the gap against like his Asian spam, It also got Power Whip, so I can just counteract Kyger a little bit better now, And Stone Edge is also amazing against like Charizard, So I just try to fill in these gaps, and I think only Gyarados can really do that, or maybe I guess Landorus, Because ironically, whenever I tested this team for Worlds, Landorus actually did better against Rain than Gyarados did, because a lot of Kygers just carried Thunder, and Earthquake was just better against Zacian as well. And it did similar damage to Kyger as Power Whip did. So
that's interesting.
That makes sense. Why choice band Landorus on this team in particular?
Interestingly enough, why Adamant choice band Landorus? Because I just wanted to use Jolly Landorus as my kind of like small check, like semi-check to Venusaur, but I find out if the Zacian is very bulky, I might not be able to one-shot the Zacian with Jolly Choice Band Earthquake. So I just wanted to get like a Element Choice Band to just make sure that it knocks out. But I think like Choice Band Ladders was also like my secondary, I think my secondary check. Gyarados was like my third check to Charizard, Gmax Charizard, And I think Choice Band Stone Edge just and a lot of the Charizards were like bulky at Worlds as well, so I was just like glad to maybe be able to outspeed them and just like hit them hard with Choice Band Stone Edge, So
Yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense. I think it's really interesting, by the way, that your Landorus doesn't have Fly. I think it's the first Landorus all season. I mean, even the Landorus I that we saw were using Fly because of the Dynamax option to turn into Max Airstream. So I think it's really cool that you identified that on your specific team. You clearly weren't going to be Dynamaxing Landorus, and so you didn't need Fly because, yeah, I mean, Fly is only good in Dynamax, pretty much.
Yeah, and Gyarados didn't have bounce either, so I just knew that even if I would Dynamax the Gyarados, it would have probably went for like Max Roadfall against the Charizard, you know. But yeah, I just recognized Dalga is going to be Dynamaxing like 99% of the time.
Yeah,
I think I Dynamaxed Voltal twice. In one set, that is, because I thought Dialga wasn't very good there. And I Dynamaxed Gyarados once. All the other games I just Dynamaxed Dialga because it was just such a offensively potent Pokemon, and it hit so much of the metagame for like super effective damage.
Yeah, I think one thing that I noticed about Dialga, because I explored Dialga a little bit, not nearly as much as you did before World, and the reason I turned away from it, the reason I didn't like it is that I felt it was really inflexible with its Dynamax, where I felt like you had to Dynamax it or it was just so much weaker. And so I couldn't find a way to make that work. And what I really like about your team is that you found really good complementary offense, which was difficult because when I was building around Dialga, I was really only finding support Pokemon that I felt fit with it, like Thundurus, some other like support Pokemon Amoonguss, you know. And so it's really interesting because it felt like to me that a lot of the offense in the format was coming from the restricted Pokemon like Zacian, Groudon, Kyogre, Calyrex, etc., or Dynamax Pokemon like Regieleki, Thundurus, Zapdos, Charizard. And so it's really interesting that you found Pokemon that functioned as offensive, non-Dynamax, non-restricted Pokemon with Gyarados and Landorus. So I think that's really a really neat way, and it makes sense that you did so well with Dialga because I think that kind of solves the fundamental issue of not being flexible with your Dynamax.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well said. Yeah.
I think it's also really interesting to compare how you approached the same issue as Shoma Honami, who also he had different Pokemon, but he still had the Choice Band Landorus and Telepathy, Dialga, and Ferrothorn combination. And I thought that it was really interesting that even though you solved these problems in unique ways, you were still approaching it from similar angles, which when I'm team building or evaluating a team it's a green flag to me, is like, oh, these people both identify the same problems, and that's why these teams are common. Have some commonalities.
Yeah, I think like the third turn on this team was basically like we just needed something like to soak the Max Geysers from Kyogre, you know. And ironically, third turn was not very good at that either. It really needed the Max Quake boost to do that. And I think like as well, like the third one was also like a good check to Palkia Kali-Ice, which made like the matchup from good to like basically impossible for them because like I mean a lot of them actually had Palkia with Flamethrower. You know, which was basically like it was for a Shedinja, but it had the cool bonus of dealing with third phone, you know. But yeah, I still did like Dialga, so it wasn't any easier for them.
So I'll put a link to your team report in the description for the podcast. But I'd like to talk a little bit about your Worlds 2018 run, because
I was hoping we'd talk about this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the teams that actually comes to mind first when I think about you as a player. But before we talk about that team, I'd like to ask what your season was like leading up to Worlds 2018. So how did you qualify?
Well, it was actually quite difficult for me to qualify because half of the year was 2017, and I wasn't really like that good of a player back then, and I wasn't really like into like playing more defensive teams. I was just trying to just play hyper offense in every metagame, and like 2018 Worlds just confirmed that. But most importantly, 2017 was very defensive metagame, and like my mindset of just going with hyper offense wasn't very compatible with that. And unfortunately, Europe was also the region that got still the 2017 format for their internationals, because we had it like in December or something. So I didn't get much CP out of that half of the season. I think I got some, but I think Prague Special just like kind of made me qualify for Worlds because I just won that and got like 200 CP there. So yeah, I just probably qualified for Worlds only because of the Prague Special, and I'm kind of glad I won that tournament because technically I defended my counter at this point.
Oh, that's awesome! I love that. So, can you tell us a little bit more about the thinking behind your Worlds 2018 team?
We should. Can you tell the Can we tell the listeners about what the team was?
Yes.
Before we talk about the process.
We've got Life Orb Sarina. We've got Electrium Z Zapdos, Focus Sash Bisharp, Mega Blaziken, Choice Specs Tapu Fini, and Choice Scarf Mixed Landorus.
And I just really quickly, before I let David take the floor here, I just want to say that for our listeners who maybe aren't familiar with 2018, there are some very unusual Pokemon on this team.
Yes.
Mega Blaziken was, I mean, people who are more familiar with single battles might think that it's quite strong, but in competitive Pokemon, it's not really ever, I don't think I ever saw one except against, I wouldn't say it was like never used, like over the course of the whole season. I think I actually played one at one point, but it was not considered especially strong in all honesty. Like it wasn't super common at all. And one of the only times Sarina has been used, I think, ever, apart from Santino's Players Cup Invitational team. Sarina is not typically thought of as an especially strong Pokemon. Actually, it did pop up, I think, at times in 2019, maybe, if I'm not much mistaken. But yeah, very, very, and especially with Life Orb, a very unusual pick. So that's just some context for people who maybe aren't as familiar with. And Mixed Landorus also not a common pick either. So a lot of interesting choices. But okay, David, I'll let you take the floor.
Yeah, so this team was basically like, well, first things first, the Blaziken plus Bisharp had a phenomenal like matchup against Sun, which had Charizard Y as their like mega choice, and also they usually like relied on Intimidate to deal with physical attackers because Charizard Y's defense wasn't really that great. And Bisharp plus Blaziken was just pretty much a perfect counteraction for that. I can Rock Slide the Charizard Y for one shot if it wasn't intimidated, and even if they like intimidated me, the Landorus on the switch would probably get one-shotted by Assurance, which doubles in power if attack connected already that turn into that slot, which also doubled down as a like a counteraction to Cresselia, because like Rock Slide does the chip, just carries Charizard Y, does chip damage on Cresselia, and then Assurance just kind of picks it off, picks up the rest. So I think this combination was just basically tailored to deal with the Charizard Y. And then I had like Chalk on my mind, which was still kind of popular. The Life Orb and Serena, I think I ran Jolly natured. Was because I remember a lot of Kangaskhan's were like bulky back then, and they really didn't outspeed Serena. So I just kind of could have outsped them and went for a high jump kick. Most importantly, of course, Serena also blocked Fake Out. So Mega Kangaskhan couldn't Fake Out turn one, and if the lead, also the Tapu Fini actually had some negative speed IVs. It could underspeed Cresselia and Heatran under Chalk's Trick Room, I just wanted some like options against the Trick Room, and so I ran this Tapu Fini. Landorus and Zapdos were like most of the time like my closing the game down, were used for closing the game down. Of course, Zapdos also got Talent, which was very important in the, I believe, Mega Metagross matchup. So my Bisharp can outspeed our Metagross, and for example, after he favored from Zapdos, Assurance in for a one-shot. And the Landorus was probably the wildest set of all because it's special defensive, mild Landorus, which I believe increases special attack and lowers defense. I wanted special defense EVs for, I don't think it was popular, but Adrenaline, Orb, Nihiligo, and Hindenburg Ice. I wanted to take Hindenburg Ice from Nihiligo, and I wanted enough speed to outspeed up Coco with Choice Scarf, and I wanted the non-negative attack nature so I can one-shot Charizard Y with Stone Edge, even if I get intimidated. And I'm special attacking Landorus with Earth Power and Hindenburg Ice, so I just wanted plus special attack nature. And so this left me with only defense nature to lower. So
cool.
I guess that's how Landorus came to be.
That is really interesting. That is, it's interesting to me, not only the very specific choices that you identified, but also that you remember them so well. But I guess if you're going that specific, it makes sense that it would stick around. So yeah, that's really, really interesting. I really admire I think your ability to identify exactly what each slot needs to do and which Pokemon like each of your team members needs to be strong against is very, very interesting, because I think a lot of players get caught up in what they can EV for, like, oh, I could survive this situation or this combination of attacks. But in reality, it's more important to know it's not like what you can EV for, it's what you should EV for. And I feel like you're doing a really good job of identifying the matchups in which you're bringing your Pokemon and then what the EVs in those matchups need to do.
That's a real commonality between how you talked about your Worlds team for 2022 and for 2018. And I was just sort of wondering, how do you identify the things that you think that you need to prepare specifically for? Like in 2018, 2019, you said Charizard Y, Adrenaline Orb Nihilego. In 2022, you were talking about Sun a lot. Gyarados, pretty much on its own, beats each of the popular Sun Pokemon individually. So how do you identify these things? Is it through your experience on the ladder?
Yeah, usually I just ladder so many games. I just start like I don't even write it down. I already know what's popular because I just play so many games. I just also look at the popular teams that just placed well in the tournaments lately. But mostly ladder I take as an inspiration to counteract some stuff.
I guess tying into that, Blaziken and Bisharp and all of these little techs. Some players might categorize this as a team that excels in best of one. Because, you're always on the ladder, you're always presumably winning on the ladder too, and hyper offense teams tend to have that sort of reputation. But then you take this team and you go 7-0 on day one. How do you sort of think about best of one versus best of three?
Yeah, I just usually think whenever team got an advantage against some other team, I think it just sticks to all of the best of three, surprise elements or not, opponent still has to kind of consider it, and it still even restricts their choices in the next game, and usually whenever I just come into these teams, I look at the matchups in pretty big detail, and I look into other leads opponent can do, and I usually still whenever I'm testing, or theorem on the outcomes, I still come up with a result that I'm still advantages on best of one or best of three,
Yeah, for sure.
If you got an advantage, you got an advantage.
I agree with that. I also think it's worth noting that you were talking about how going into 2018, in the 2017 format, you were more inclined towards a more offensive, a really offensive style. And the Pokemon that you use on your Worlds 2018 team, I think there are elements of that more hyper offensive style, but overall you have a lot of bulk as well. Zapdos, a naturally very bulky Pokemon. Landorus, not a frail Pokemon by any means, especially with your special defense EVs and Intimidate. Sarina also has decent natural bulk. I don't know exactly how it was trained. And Focus Sash, on the Bisharp, is also not, it's always taking at least 2 attacks. And then also Mega Blaziken is really offensive, but unlike base Blaziken, which is really frail, Mega Blaziken, I think, gains 20 in each defensive stat. So it actually ends up being, with some support from Intimidate and stuff, it actually ends up being respectably bulky. It's probably not going to get one shot by a lot of neutral hits, for example, which is, when I think about hyper offense teams, I think a lot of them don't have that defensive backbone, but I think your team did. If that makes sense. So I think it's interesting to see kind of how that offensive style, it was still present in your team, but it was no longer the predominant style, at least in my perspective.
Yeah, I think it was a bit accidental. I actually remember, at least one thing was an accidental. I just remembered the Mega Blaziken was EV'd to take the Stomping Tantrum from Mega Metagross. I guess I just didn't want my team to be one-shotted every time, but more importantly, two-shotted,
Well, then you get 2 attacks, so that's important.
I have a slightly tangential question. I'm looking at, this is just a little bit off topic, but I'm looking at your, one thing that I've noticed between your Worlds 2018 and your Worlds 2022 team is a certain move, Stone Edge. You have Stone Edge twice on your Worlds 22 team. I think you said you had it under Landorus on Worlds 18, if I'm not much mistaken. But what I think is interesting is that Stone Edge is a move that I refuse to use personally. I find it really inconsistent because the accuracy is only 80%. And so, what's interesting to me is that looking at your Worlds 22 team, for example, you don't really have any other inaccurate moves. I mean, you have a couple 90 plus, Roar of Time, Snarl. I guess Power Whip is slightly inaccurate, but it's so good that it doesn't. I feel like missing a Power Whip is not the same as missing a Stone Edge because you're normally missing Power Whip on a Pokemon that's not one-shotting. Whereas aside from Gastrodon, whereas Stone Edge is Charizard most of the time, which can be pretty impactful. So can you kind of explain how you think why you like this move so much, or how I assume it's been working for you despite the fact that it's kind of inconsistent. I would just love to hear your thoughts on Stone Edge in general.
Yeah, it's again, I think it was purely accidental as well, because I think Stone Edge, 80% accuracy, I probably wouldn't have if I had alternative, I would have probably used 90 base power attack. But usually for example, if I could pick a Rock Slide with I don't know, 75% to one shot, or if I, for example, would have to run the Rock Slide on my Landorus on 2018 team, I would have actually had to give up a lot of attack to one shot Charizard Y. But with Stone Edge, I can I guess put the EVs to more use in other areas, that I feel are more important. It's basically trading Charizard Y backup matchup, because Blaziken is the main check to add, and on my 2022 team, it was Dialga with Max Rockfort. It was my primary Charizard check. deck. So I just have like backup option, and I don't really care about backup option being bad if like the backup Pokemon can do like other things as well, I guess.
Yeah.
So
I see. Okay, thank you. I didn't, you've convinced me, and I didn't expect to be convinced, but that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
That's a really cool way of mitigating the downside of Stone Edge, because you have your primary plan, and then you have your backup plan, which includes, this move that can miss sometimes, but that's okay because you already had your primary plan, so the amount of times that you're going to be using Stone Edge is lower, but it's still good to have. That's sort of how I interpreted what you said.
And it makes sense because like here's the thing that confused me about your use of Stone Edge. Sorry, not to really hark on the point, but
God, boys.
I feel like normally players who are willing to use Stone Edge in particular have a lot are willing to use inaccurate moves across the board. And so when I looked at like if you left just the Stone Edge just blank and asked me to guess what the moves were on the team, like I wouldn't have guessed Stone Edge looking at the rest of the team because the rest of the team is built very consistently. Like you don't have a lot of inaccurate moves, and I feel like players who are willing to use inaccurate moves typically like are really willing and will use it in more places. Like whereas players who are not willing to take those risks tend to like be pretty consistent there too. So I thought the inclusion of Stone Edge in particular on a team that is so consistent and has so many 100% or 95 plus accurate moves was unusual. So hearing that it's just like it's the panic button basically. It's the emergency option makes a lot of sense, and I like that use of the move. Sorry, I got carried away.
No. I mean, I think it's cool. I just personally, I don't think about move accuracy that way. So, I mean, it's also interesting to hear your sort of perspective. I think, if it's needed, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But before we move on from 2018, I wanted to talk about your round 7 game of day 2 versus Brendan Zhang, which is often cited to be one of the best games of VGC to watch back, and I'll link it in the description of this video. It didn't go your way, but one of the reasons this is one of the best games is because how you played is really, really commendable. Do you find that your favorite teams allow you to play in a certain way during the game?
Well, first off, I actually played Brandon Zhang day 1 as well, last round. And in all honesty, I'm not sure if I really played that game that well, but definitely you said so. But most importantly, the interesting part about this is that after I left the day 1 Worlds, I was like, I don't know, tired, but I thought I won the game against Brandon Zhang extremely commandingly. And whenever I looked back on the day 1 game against Brandon Zhang, like years after, it was like a few months ago, and I looked, oh my goodness, this game was very close. I was like always one prediction off from like getting absolutely earth-powered into Blaziken, So whenever I just went to the game 2, now I just a little bit more understand why I was so off guard, because I think the game was pretty close, and I thought it was pretty. I won commandingly, so I thought I maybe it might have been felt a bit too confident coming into the round 7 of day 2,
Yes.
And I might have made some mistakes along the way as a result.
I think that makes just really quickly. I remember talking to Brendan before that match, and he was like, "Yeah, like we played day 1, and as I recall, like this is years ago, but I remember him conveying that your set was not close, that he kind of got he kind of got blown out of the water. So I think it would make sense that like given at that point you were like, did you 2-0 Brendan day 1?
I think so.
Yeah, like it would make sense that like that's the 3rd game you've played. The first 2 presumably were like not super close, and so if you win the 3rd game, like you would be like, okay, you might be thinking of it not in the context of that second best of 3 set alone, but with the context of the first day as well.
Yeah.
I never want to play somebody who I've beaten again in a tournament. I think in those situations, sometimes I'm more afraid of them than they are of me, because the way you conceptualize a set after you've won and after you've lost are 2 very different things. And when you lose, you sort of enter that like, oh my God, I have to do something to beat this person mode, especially if you've, got what you thought was blown out.
Yeah, so like I think I like similar. I was just like, all right, this worked the day 1, so why shouldn't I try the same thing day 2? I think even looking into notebook, looking like, all right, I led with these 2 Pokemon. I had these 2 in the back, and that worked, But I think day 2, it was like he brought out some surprises. I remember facing against Stone Edge Mega Salamence, and I did not see that the first day, So that kind of caught me off guard, Yeah, it was like it felt like a completely different game. I felt like I was the one against the wall this time, And it probably was because like he gave it a thought as to what to do, and I didn't. So he just came out on top because of that, you know.
Sort of stepping back from just everything we've talked about as a whole, how would you describe how you like to build teams and how you like to play in battle? Just generally. Just let's some larger takeaways, I guess, because we got kind of specific at some points.
All right. So usually, I mean, my philosophy in team building is like that the team is probably going to be 85% of this tournament success. And I want to mitigate as much like human unpredictability as possible, because even if these different people play the same team, they can play it in different ways, and I can be caught off guard. So I try to mitigate as much prediction as possible and my teams usually allow me to just not play that much and just more autopilot against the popular teams, you know. But I still want to have some like kind of basic idea of the team, you know, so I can just like fall back if I don't really recognize the opponent's team as the popular one.
Do you think that your willingness to use unconventional teams, like you're not using them because they're unconventional, you're using them because they fill specific niches, but do you think that having like you are almost always going to have more experience in a matchup than your opponent by virtue of your teams, right? Like when you were at Worlds this year, for example, I would guess that let's say you're playing against a Zacian Ogre or a Zacian Calyrex or a Zacian Groudon, and you're, Yveltal Dialga, like you're always going to have much more experience playing against their composition than they are against yours. Do you think that that's like a meaningful factor in your success, or do you think that it's more of a smaller factor?
I mean, I would say probably even a big factor, because like they really got like 90 seconds to prepare their thoughts, and I already like tried out everything. I already know how the game is probably going to be and how it's going to go. And I mean, I really like that, you know?
Yeah. That was my hunch as well, but I wanted to ask you because, and I think also it's probably worth noting that it probably depends on the format, right? Where like, especially in a format where with a much wider pool of usable Pokemon, like the one we just had in VGC 2022, where there were so many different restricted Pokemon, having, I feel like, experience and having knowing which Pokemon to bring, first of all, and also how to use them is really valuable. So I'm not surprised to see you do so well at Worlds this year, given that.
Definitely.
Yeah, I also don't really like to have target on my head with a popular team, because I don't want the same thing to happen to me, you know? Just like your team counteracting.
Yes, that makes sense.
It's sort of a weird calculus where you have to pick. I mean, ideally you pick something that is off the beaten path, but if it's good, then other people are going to pick up on it, and then they'll understand it more, maybe try it for themselves, and you kind of have to just hope that you stay in this weird place that no one else wants to go. Do you build for Worlds differently than like regionals?
I think I do. I feel like regionals have like a lot of like not so experienced players in them, so I can just kind of like get away with like more simplistic team, I would say. Like, in all honesty, I just can almost always count on opponent just making some mistake here and there, you know. So I can be a bit my teams don't really have to be that perfect and can be a little bit more straightforward. But for example, for Worlds, I just can't really count on that anymore. So I try to make a little bit smarter teams, but it also allows me to just kind of like let like stuff like Seeking, I don't have to prepare for that anymore. But for like a original, I can just kind of like I can be a little bit stressed about that, you know. Although Seeking is like extreme example, but you get the idea.
Oh yeah, definitely. So before my last question, I just want to ask: we've talked about some teams and that you've run; they're really cool. Are there some cool teams that you've made that you haven't gotten the chance to show off? Like, what are your favorite teams that you've built, other than the ones that we've talked about?
I think there are like two examples. One of them is my Sun team from Sun Series. And of the Sun Series, I ran like, it was like Stack Attacker for Xerneas, and then I had this Choice Scarf Tapu Koko to counteract the opponent's Choice Scarf Geigers, and it worked like amazingly. It was really amazing.
That's awesome.
Were you wild charged?
It actually had Thunder. It was enough. It's modest Thunder was scaling Geigers in Sun Series.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that calc.
But the Electric Train got nerfed, so now Rigel he has to just take over. Like the other team was like some kind of Torkoal plus Grimmsnarl dual screens in the Players Cup 3. Basically, what Torkoal allowed me to do was to have like under dual screens to have G-Max Charizard and Zacian, and it was really brutal to have these two guys in the back. So I really like that as well.
That's awesome.
That sounds like a really cool team.
Yeah, you've got a really cool portfolio across the years that you've played. I just think that that's so cool. All right, wrapping things up, this is my last question. So you're pretty well known in the community for posting funny or unexpected interactions that you find on the ladder. You also post some pretty lighthearted tweets and jokes about the game in general. So one of I think your most popular tweet, and this is actually one of r/VGC's most popular posts, is of a kid going up the steps, and he's skipping like 5 steps. And the kid is labeled VGC newcomer. Steps are labeled learning the basics, learning team building and borrowing teams, laddering a lot, knowing the metagame, and the kid's foot is firmly planted on making an original team, like the 10th step up. And so what kind of advice would you give a newer player that sees you playing with these super creative and cool teams and thinks that I want to play teams like that and do that well with them?
Well, we can approach this from multiple different perspectives. I think if you just want to have fun for sake of having fun and not going to tournaments, I think you can totally have fun with some original Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
But if you would like to get good tournament placing, usually whenever you build such a team, you don't build the team from the unique Pokemon. You first really build the team, and then if the unique Pokemon fills in the gaps your team has, only then you add the original Pokemon. It's not the other way around. What a lot of these newcomers do is they just pick an original Pokemon and then they build the team around it. But the good teams are built the exact opposite way.
I think that's really insightful.
Yeah, I agree. How I sort of think is throughout this time, you've been talking about the different niches that your Pokemon fill. Like, for example, this mild mixed Landorus survives Adrenaline Orb, Hidden Power Ice, Nihilego. That's a niche. And then the word niche in Pokemon sort of raises some alarms for me, because when a lot of people use it, it's like, oh, Furret has a niche. Eviolite Barbaracle has a niche. It's out there. I just need to find it. And they're looking for, a nail to hit their hammer with. But sorry, that's not a great.
I have one. I got you. I know exactly what you want to say. Wait, ready?
Okay.
Sit down. You're sitting down?
Okay, I'm sitting.
You have a square piece,
Yes.
and you're looking for a square hole.
Yes. But you have a hole that you're looking to fill, and you're looking for the right thing to fit that purpose. And I just think that it's so driven by practicality, by how you're trying to meet your goals. And, that's to win the tournament. That's to beat the best teams in these situations that are scary. So I thought that especially was super insightful, just hearing you talk in general.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us. I think that's all the questions that we have. Wolf, I don't know if you have anything else.
Yeah, I guess I'm sure the listeners will want to know, what this next year is going to be pretty pivotal for VGC with the release of Scarlet and Violet. Can listeners, fans of yours, can they expect anything from you, or what can they expect from you in VGC 2023 with Scarlet and Violet?
Well, I'm going to just try, and most importantly, I just want to find some time to just get into international and regional or two, just so I can qualify for Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm definitely going to be making some Metagame Mondays videos as well with the new release, if I find time, that is. And maybe if I'm going to find time to ladder, I might just record it as well and make it a content,
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'm going to make some interesting observations whilst laddering that you might find useful.
Awesome. And for any listeners who are having trouble with the link, David's channel is Hamster Mania VGC on YouTube. So we'll include the links as well in the description. Yeah. But just as a reminder, you should definitely subscribe, especially if you care about getting better at VGC and seeing how one of the best creative team builders, you like their process and stuff. So would definitely recommend you check out David's channel.
I'm Metagame Monday's #1 fan, so I'm very excited to hear that. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really, really am grateful to have gotten the chance to speak to you and to hear all of your insights. I feel like I learned a ton about Pokemon, so thank you.
Same here. Yeah, thanks so much, David. We know you're busy, so we really appreciate you taking the time.
You're welcome.
Cool. As always, we'd like to thank Pedro Lima for the audio editing and Eyeliner for the use of their song Toy Dog. And that's it from us.
Awesome.
Have a great day.
Goodbye.
Yeah, thanks for listening. We'll see you. I don't know. What are we doing this weekly,
Is
Aaron?
that a dorky way to end the podcast? Have a great day. Thanks for shopping.
Have a great, I was trying to save you a little bit.
Okay. Well, we're going to go now.
Bye-bye.